Hey everybody, welcome back to History Student Reacts. Today we'll be watching Admiral Yi Part 1, Keep Beating the Drum by Extra History. So yes, we are finally beginning our series on Admiral Yi. I know a lot of you have been excited for this one. We haven't done much East Asian history on this channel, a fact that I regret, and this is going to be sort of stepping into that field of history, which I'm very excited to do. Now, I do not know too much about Admiral Yi. I know he was a Korean admiral in the late 1500s, I believe, who fought against the Japanese. Outside of that, my knowledge is pretty limited, so this series will be a lot of me learning as I go, and if you guys want to further educate me, please leave comments down below. I'm very appreciative when you guys have things to add, or things to teach me, or include things that maybe Extra History might have left out. Anyway, with all of that out of the way, I'm very excited to jump into this video series on Admiral Yi, so let's get started with part 1. Oh my. What an opening. A bloody battle. Maybe a look at the future of this series.
The year is 1572, 26 years earlier. A 28-year-old man rides across an open plain. A group of military men stand quietly, observing. His horse stumbles. He's thrown. At first, everybody watching thinks he's dead. His leg is horribly bent, broken. But after a moment, he gets up, dragging one leg behind him, and pulls himself to a willow tree. He binds his leg with its branches, remounts his horse, and finishes the military examination.
My goodness, talk about resourcefulness, huh? Not only resourcefulness, but a determination to keep going, and sort of an essential toughness.
He fails the exam anyway, but 4 years later, he'll be back. He'll pass, and so will begin the career of one of the most glorious admirals of all time. It's strange.
Oh, I'm very excited. You know, a lot of you have said that Admiral Yi is truly one of the greatest admirals in history, and so I'm very excited to learn about him. You know, we have some other famous admirals. Admiral Nelson is one that I'm a lot more familiar with, and I see people making comparisons between the two occasionally, so I'm excited to see Yi's career and achievements.
It seems that this man even decided to join the military. Korea had known 200 years of relative peace, threatened only by the occasional raids from the Jurchen tribes on the northern border and pirate crews plying the nearby sea. The military was not a highly respected career choice for a man of noble birth. Taking the civil service exams and joining the ranks of the Confucian court was a much better way to achieve power and success.
Yeah, and so this is something I do know a bit about. We're talking about East Asian history, in this case Korea, but at this point in time, Korea was very much influenced by China, as were a lot of countries in Asia. You know, China was this massive, powerful empire, and at certain times it was more powerful than at other times, but it always had a rather high degree of power and a lot of cultural influence. And so if we look at a lot of these countries, we see the examination system. You know, this is what China has really become known for throughout their history. This system of bureaucracy where scholars would take these very intense examinations in order to join the bureaucracy. Very well trained, and this system was exported to a lot of other countries, I suppose Korea among them. And so unlike in a lot of Western countries, this sort of aristocratic bureaucracy developed. Now, it was technically a meritocratic system, and sometimes that meritocracy was respected more than other times, but this class of scholars was a very elite class, and oftentimes the aristocracy would want to be more in line with that than with military affairs. So that's sort of an interesting culture difference from some other countries at this same time. And I know that particularly about China, but like I said, China exported a lot of its culture to many other places, and it seems like Korea had something similar going on.
And yet, this man, Yi Sun-shin, though he was schooled in the Confucian texts, had dreamed of being a soldier since he was a little boy. And so, at last, when he had passed the military exam, he was appointed to a desolate fort along the northern border. While most of the border forts were pits of corruption, seen simply as a place to dump individuals who had fallen out of favor with the court, Yi drilled his men rigorously and refortified his post, bringing it up to true readiness in case of an attack. One day, the provincial governor came by to inspect the post.
And I'm curious how we see him sort of move from army to navy, because, we see situations where maybe the navy is more respected than the army, or more often, maybe the army is more respected than the navy. That can often be the case. I think of, say, Napoleonic France. It was certainly more impressive to work your way up through the army than it was to work your way up through the navy. Of course, sometimes the opposite is true. We can look at Britain, for an example. Not to say that the army wasn't respected, but, of course, the navy was so important to Britain that, it was a pretty prestigious place to be, particularly in more modern British history.
This was a man all of the fort commanders dreaded, known for his harsh punishments and brutal discipline. But when he came to Yi, he simply said, well done, and moved on.
All right.
Shortly thereafter, Yi was moved back to Seoul, a sign of growing favor, and he was given a post at the military academy there, training new recruits. He was, by all accounts, rigorous, diligent, and incorruptible. And this was exactly the problem. At this time, the military academy was actually a tool for younger noble sons to jump up the ranks quickly, and for courtiers to channel their favorite people into the cushiest assignments.
So of course, this is something very common that we see throughout many countries, throughout history, and especially in this time period, this sort of elite corruption throughout the military. We can think of, say, a lot of Western countries, a lot of European countries who, of course, their armies were in some way meritocratic, but primarily at this point in time, we're talking about the 1500s, the top positions are available only to those of noble birth. And of course, if you were an aristocrat, you would rise through the ranks of the military far quicker than someone who was a commoner. So this is absolutely something we see many, many examples of. Unsurprising that we find it here as well. And someone like Yi, who we haven't learned much about him yet, seems like uncorruptible, that's how they put it, a sort of straightforward guy, hardworking. That's great, but if you don't have those connections, that can end up being a problem. I'm not sure if it will be in Yi's case, but it certainly can be.
And Yi was not cooperating.
Oh.
So, after a short stay in Seoul, he was booted back to a provincial assignment. By July, though, he had secured a position running a naval garrison and was rapidly rising up the ranks again.
All right.
Here, too, he was schemed against by corrupt officials. Many attempts were made to have Yi removed, but each one he parried expertly until, one day, one of his previous superiors from the military academy, one who Yi had rebuked for corruption, was called to his province.
Yeah, that is how you make a lot of enemies in a system like this. You be someone who's truthful and faithful to the cause. You call out people for corruption. But in such a corrupt system, that will make you a lot of enemies and get you into a lot of trouble. And I'm not sure what sort of background Yi was from, or if he had a lot of connections in high places. If he did, it seems like they're not coming through, but maybe he didn't, and maybe he was sort of on his own. Regardless of the connections he had, though, if you're trying to fight back against a corrupt system, you can get yourself in some trouble.
To do an inspection. Seeing an opportunity for revenge, the inspector wrote a report castigating Yi, saying he was completely negligent.
I think of someone like Thomas Cochrane. We've done videos on him, who is a British officer during the Napoleonic Wars, and he did come from a noble background, but he was someone who did things his own way and refused to show deference to his superiors, even when it might have been a good thing to do. He refused to engage in the aristocratic corruption that let people rise through the ranks, and so Cochrane, though he was very impressive, and he achieved a lot throughout his career, he was barred from the highest ranks of the Navy. So far, that's kind of what Yi is reminding me of.
The report got to Seoul, Yi found himself dismissed from the military entirely. 4 months later, though, he was vindicated. Found innocent of the charges against him, he was returned to service, but demoted to the lowest possible officer grade. He might have languished at this menial post, but at last his diligence was finally rewarded when he was brought back to meaningful duty by none other than one of his former rivals. One of the fleet commanders who Yi had served under while maintaining the naval garrison had been transferred to the northern frontier, and knowing that he'd need good, capable officers, he requested Yi be sent with him.
Hey, and this is where it comes in handy that you're someone who is capable, you're able to do the job even though you've made a lot of enemies, if there comes a time when, regardless of the, politicking, the aristocratic handshaking, if you just need someone who can do the job, get the job done, then you're going to go back to Yi, even though Yi refuses to engage in the corruption, and that seems to be hurting his career so far. If you need someone who's actually capable, then you know where to turn.
Soon, though, it became clear that Yi was needed to garrison a fort on the Tumen River, which was one of the demarcation lines between Jurchen and Korean territory. Jurchen raiders roamed far south of the Korean border, looting and pillaging at will. Raids had nearly overrun the nearby frontier province, and so Yi took up the post. He drilled his troops until they were in top shape, and knowing that simply shoring up the defenses wouldn't be enough, he laid his troops out for an ambush and then lured the raiders into Korean territory. He fell on them with a ferocity and a swiftness they had never seen in Korea.
All right.
Within hours, the tribes were...
They said that Korea hadn't been too focused on the military before this. They hadn't faced too many external threats, and so they've been more focused on government, civil politics, their examination system, and so probably these raiders aren't expecting too much of a pushback from the Koreans, who typically are not focused on this military stuff. But hey, you send Yi up there, he's training his troops, he's getting them ready, he even lays out a trap. He's a different beast. This is something that they may not have dealt with before.
Smashed, and their power shattered. They would never again be such a threat to the province.
Wow!
But here, too, Yi was stymied by a jealous superior, and while the court was jubilant about his success, the official record reads, although the court recognized Yi Sun-shin's meritorious service to the king, it nevertheless decided against awarding him a prize. Shortly after this...
Damn, Yi can't get anything, huh? Despite his achievements, he keeps getting blocked or pushed downwards.
Yis father died, and being deeply rooted in Confucian ideals, Yi retired home for 3 years in accordance with the traditional mourning period.
Yep. I'm certainly not an expert on Confucianism, but I do know that respect, reverence for one's family, one's elders, one father in particular, is a really important aspect of Confucianism. So, that fits, definitely.
When he at last returned to service, he was put in charge of transportation for the court, but a mere 16 days later, it was decided that Yi was needed too badly at the border, and once again, he was sent north.
They just need him. Regardless of where they want to put him, they want to keep demoting him. Every time something happens, those in power are like, well, I guess we gotta send Yi back north, because we need someone who can actually deal with the problem.
It was to man a small island fortress. Undermanned, crumbling, beyond disrepair, he once again drilled its garrison, shored up its defenses, and week after week sent out a request to the district commander for reinforcements.
Yep.
Then, one morning, as the mists rolled in and most of the men were out harvesting rice because the military was in such a state that men on the border had to harvest their own food, the Jurchen attacked, pouring out of the mist on horseback. Yi Sun-shin only had a dozen men to defend with. He and his handful of soldiers...
Yeah, when they said undermanned, they really meant undermanned, huh?
Fought desperately, cutting their way to one group of captives and escaping with 50 people the Jurchen would have taken prisoner. But by this time, you know the story. In order to avoid blame, Yi's superior, a man named Yi-il, blamed the entire defeat on Yi Sun-shin.
Damn.
He had him brought back to the capital, tortured, and put on trial in an attempt to have him condemned.
Jesus! You think after his achievements, even at this point, Yi has already proven himself to be capable, that sort of after a long enough time, the court might start saying, yeah, so Yi keeps getting blamed for all of this stuff, but everywhere he is, we see success. So maybe we should, take some of these accusations with a grain of salt, right? Every time you get someone saying something bad about Yi, we might want to go, is this really true, considering all the success he's seen? I don't know.
So that Yi-il could avoid any of the blame. But Yi Sun-shin did not crack under torture, and when it came time to take the stand, he said this to Yi-il. My lord, you are asking me to assume the whole responsibility for the misfortune, but you are wrong. May I remind you that you have always refused my frequent request for reinforcement. The defeat was not a result of my negligence of duty, but in large part, your fault. Therefore, it is not I, but you, who should be held responsible for the defeat. The court was stunned.
Admiral Yi's pulling out the receipts. He's saying, look, y'all are blaming me for this. I did my best in a difficult situation. I managed to save several people when we fled. How about you? You're not sending reinforcements. You're not sending supplies. don't you bear some of the responsibility for this? I mean, sounds pretty convincing to me, if true, and it seems like it is true.
Many of them knew of Yi's record and were inclined to believe him. So
Right,
in the end,
right.
he was allowed to live, but he was
Okay.
stripped of his rank again.
Damn.
And
Okay. Well, it seems like Yi's good reputation did save him there, but it still didn't save his position, which he still lost. I mean, I suppose that's better than being imprisoned or executed. I'm not sure entirely what the punishment would have been, but Yi, once again demoted, still in a tough position.
returned to the army as a common enlisted man, starting over at the very bottom, as if he'd never
Jeez.
taken the military examinations.
Really?
He was once again placed on the northern border.
I'm kind of surprised he even went back, though. I mean, it seems like Admiral Yi was a man of true determination. You know, it appears that this was what he wanted to do. He wanted to serve in the military, and regardless of what happened, he was going to do it.
And asked to fight the invading tribes, and once again he did so with distinction, until
course.
finally in 1588 he asked that he be allowed to retire.
Ah.
But storm clouds were gathering over Korea, and some, especially his longtime friend, a man named Ryu Sung-young, recognized that soon the country would have need of good military men. While Yi had struggled through his career in the military, Ryu, his childhood compatriot, who had been his companion in games of war, had risen to be Prime Minister of Korea.
Okay, so hey, Yi does have some friends in high places. His childhood friend seems like a pretty powerful fellow, Prime Minister. Once again, I'm not really entirely familiar with the system of government here, but seems like this would be someone who could, maybe help Yi out, or not even some sort of corrupt, hey, I'm helping my buddies out, but at least someone who would know how talented Yi was, know his worth, and be able to put him in a position that would adequately recognize that worth.
It was actually through Ryu's influence, and because of his subtle aid, that Yi had time and again survived the machinations held against him.
Wow.
Ryu planned to see that Yi would take his rightful place for the war he feared was coming. On the next episode of Extra History, remember how in the Sengoku Jidai episodes we talked about that messy Japanese invasion of Korea? Well,
Nope.
That's about to happen.
I didn't watch that series, but I certainly will. I think that's another one that I need to get to. Some of you have recommended that one to me. It's more East Asian history that I'm entirely unfamiliar with. But anyway, turning away from Japan, back to Korea, back to Yi, that was a good episode. It was already interesting. I feel like we packed a lot into one episode. Yi basically going back and forth and back and forth and back and forth from military service to being called to court for some ridiculous reason, and then being demoted, and then going back. I mean, this is only episode 1, and that happened a lot. Hopefully, Yi will see some more steady upwards progress throughout the rest of this series. I imagine he must, considering his reputation, and presuming he had some pretty impressive achievements throughout his career. That's what it seems like, at least, so I'm excited to continue this series. I enjoyed this first episode, a bit of a shorter reaction for me. I know that some of y'all might be saying, well, this video is not particularly short, but hey, a video less than 20 minutes, for me, that's much shorter than my average video length of, 30 minutes to like an hour and a half, right? So yeah, I had a good time with this one. If you guys enjoyed this reaction, I'd appreciate it if you would check out the Patreon, which is linked down below, where you can get access to exclusive reactions, including reactions I can't put on YouTube due to copyright. Anyway, with all of that out of the way, I hope you guys are having a good day today, and I will see you all again next time. Goodbye.